Hi, I'm Weiwei Wang, Co-Executive Director for the Vermont Professionals of Color Network. Today I'm here with Vermont Secretary of State, Sarah Copeland Hanzas, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Can you tell me about what the role of the Secretary of State does?
Yes, so we have four main divisions and then a few special programs that I'll rattle through kind of quickly just so that people can sort of get the lay of the land. We have a lot of touch points on Vermonters through the Secretary of State's office. We have our Business Services Division that registers businesses and nonprofits. That is a touch point that is 110,000 businesses, 12,000 new businesses just last year. We have our Office of Professional Regulation, which does license and certification for 50 different professions. About 80,000 Vermonters have a touch point through our Office of Professional Regulation. We also run the State Archives and Records Administration, and so that's really sort of think of that as the hub that ensures transparency into what your government is doing, has done, and also many other resources for Vermonters to study Vermont government, Vermont society, birth and death records, all of that. And then we have the Elections Division, which is sort of the division that's getting the most attention right now. Not that it's my favorite child, but it is getting the most attention right now.
Well, I'm so curious how you got into this role.
So I had been in elected office for 18 years serving in the Vermont House. And, that is a part-time job. It's something where you really do have to figure out what you're going to do to pay the bills in the rest of the year. That gets tiring after a while, but the compulsion to serve is really still there, because I feel being in elected office gives me the opportunity to help solve problems that would be harder to solve if I wasn't in elected office. And so my last role in the House was as chair of the Government Operations Committee, which oversees all of the work of the Secretary of State's office. And so when the former secretary announced he was stepping down, I thought, wow, a full-time, full-year job, and I get to continue to serve, and it's in an area of state government that I'm already very familiar with. And there are so many new opportunities to do things better here at the Secretary of State's office.
You had mentioned that one of the roles of the Office of the Secretary of State is on elections, and the big question is why vote? We are coming up on the general elections on November 5th, and it's a really big deal. So for you, why should Vermonters vote?
So it's a question that I have heard many times over the years, and it's one that I talk about with my young adult children and their friends who are sort of feeling like like the wealthy and well-connected people are the ones who are making all the decisions anyway, so why should I bother? So it's been really important to me to lean into how we empower people to use their vote to make the change that they want to see, which is why we've invested in a civics program. We're doing a lot of outreach in schools to young people, tabling at community events across the state this summer to really engage with people, not only on how to vote, the mechanics of getting registered and all of that, but why to vote and how to empower and amplify your voice. It's one of the reasons why our civics program put together Vermont's first ever universal voter guide, because it's one thing to show up on election day and see a list of people, some of whom you don't know, right? But the beauty of doing universal vote by mail is that you get your ballot a month or more ahead of the election, and you can use that time to look at the candidates who are on the ballot, to reach out to them and talk to them about what your important issues are, to follow them on social media or look at their website. And so the voter guide contains all of that information, and folks who have received their ballot in the mail will see a little card in there on how to get a hold of their voter guide. And my hope is that having that first conversation happen when someone's asking for your vote will also open up a dialogue so that Vermonters feel more connected to the people who are on their ballot every other year and feel more inclined to let them know what they really care about and what issues they'd like their elected leaders to work on.
Yeah, I've so appreciated your team. They were at our annual August kickback event, tabling and making sure people had the information, even registering people on the spot, which is great. So for some of our community members, especially for the community of color who are coming from other states, especially states where their vote has been suppressed or not counted otherwise, there's this feeling of, why should I vote? Because my vote wasn't counted before, and Vermont is typically a blue state. So what is the purpose of getting engaged in that way? What would you say to that?
So in Vermont, we have always prioritized accessibility right up with secure, fair, and transparent elections. And accessibility means that there are not barriers between you and your ability to vote. And transparency really means, I can go on my voter page and see that the clerk has counted, yes, my ballot has been received, right? And so there are those checks in place so that Vermonters who are using universal vote by mail know that their ballot has been received and that it is among the ballots that are being counted on election night. And so, that accessibility is always so important. And if we couple that with the superpower of telling your elected leaders what you think is important, I think we're going to make great improvements in the health of our democracy.
Outside of the universal mail ballots, what are some other ways that people can actually vote?
So if you have not yet registered to vote, we have same-day voter registration. So there is not an arbitrary cutoff date. And so you can go to your polling place on election day, register to vote right then and there, and get your ballot that day. You can do it at your town or city clerk's office anytime between now and election day. So you can find on our Secretary of State's website a listing of the town clerk's offices and find their hours of operation as well. So registering anytime between now and November 5th. The one thing that I want to tell folks, though, is if you are planning to mail your ballot back, you want to make sure you do that before October 15th. If it's after October 15th, with mail delays, it can take 10 days or 2 weeks for mail to get to its destination. And your ballot has to be received by the town clerk by 7 p.m. on election day.
And do folks need to bring IDs to register or any other documentation?
So if you're going to register in person, it's a lower barrier because you are showing up in person. The clerk can see that you are a human being. You just need to show something that shows what your address is in town. So, bring a utility bill or a bank statement, something like that. If you do it online, you have to upload some additional documentation just to verify that you are an actual human being.
There might be some folks out there who are concerned about mailing in their ballot. And for fear that their vote won't be counted, I know that you've mentioned the My Voter page where they can go on and check to see if they've been received. If it's not received, and you've mentioned in a previous video that you've done for us, that they can actually click a button to figure out what to do about that, right?
Yeah, so if you put your ballot in the mail and you wait what you think is a reasonable amount of time and it hasn't been received, you can reach out to your town clerk and talk through what the options are. If it's somewhere in the mail system, my guess is that your clerk is going to say you need to wait until election day to give it time to arrive. But if the mail's been delivered on election day and it's not there, then you would come in, you would sign an affidavit that just simply, marks that you are voting here in person, so that if they receive a ballot in a future day, they know that they're not going to count that ballot. And the other point about tracking your ballot's return through the My Voter page is there are certain reasons why your ballot could be marked defective, like if you didn't put the ballot in the inner envelope, or if you forgot to sign that inner envelope, or if you didn't seal it properly. And so if you see that your ballot is defective, that doesn't mean that your vote's not going to be counted. It just means that you need to contact your clerk to correct that defect.
So Vermont only has a few electoral college votes. What are some ways for folks to really wrap their minds around that concept, number one, and also our state's ability to impact the national election?
Yeah, we've had this conversation a lot, being that we are such a small state. Every state has electoral seats that are equivalent to the number of seats that they have in Congress. So given that we are at the rock bottom minimum of one House of Representatives member, plus our 2 senators, our ability to influence the presidential election is relatively small. We did join the National Popular Vote movement, which is a movement to sort of circumvent the Electoral College by having states pledge that when we get enough states that have a majority of the Electoral College, that those states will then declare their electors for whoever wins the national popular vote. And if we look at presidential elections over the last 20 years, more times than not, the person who wins the election is not the person who won the popular vote. And so, it's a question of fairness. Who should be the president? The person who has the most human beings living in the United States who support them, or the person who figured out how to campaign strategically in this electoral college system. So I would encourage people who like to geek out on these sorts of things to look into national popular vote.
What are some ways then for folks to feel more empowered as we are coming into this general election and beyond?
Yeah. So when somebody is campaigning for election, they are asking for your vote. That is an ideal time to open up a conversation, especially if you have a core set of issues that you're really passionate about. But also just to test their accessibility to an average voter. So look up who's running for House in your district. Look up who's running for state Senate in your district. Those are the people who are going to be most likely to be available and accessible to you. And also, they're presumably, one candidate or the other will end up being your representative to the state house and will have a seat at the table when important decisions are being made. Yeah.
Outside of voting and the general election, thinking about empowerment, something that you've brought up, what are some ways that people can feel empowered just in their community?
Yeah. So one of the most important things, I think, is for us to try not to shy away from talking about the hard issues. We're not all going to agree on, you name the hot button issue, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't still talk about it, because oftentimes what we find is that we have common values and maybe a different definition of what the right answer is to a particular problem. And when we start talking around looking for common ground and common values, then we can create bigger coalitions of people to help solve problems. So if I care passionately about climate change, I'm going to want to talk to other people who also care about it, so that they can be talking to their elected officials, and we can ask those elected officials to support a particular piece of legislation to help make progress on that. And so it's hard, but let's not shy away from those tough conversations.
Yeah, and those conversations could really lead to more civic engagement, just at the community level, at the local, regional level, and at the state level. Can you talk a little bit more about how people can and should get civically engaged?
Yeah, so we are about to finish Vermont's first ever Civic Health Index. It's basically an analysis of a number of different data points of how people might be civically engaged. Do you help a neighbor? Do you serve on a community board? Have you attended a community meeting? Have you ever, run for office? Do you vote? All of these different markers of civic engagement are ones that we're trying to measure in Vermont so that we can get out there and work with the communities or the regional areas or the demographic groups who tend to be less connected. And so a good way to get connected civically really is to start at your local level. It's sometimes forgotten that, there are March elections for select board or for city council or school board. And these offices are the ones that have an outsized impact on your tax bill and mine, because our municipal government and our schools are funded, through our property tax, which we pay for either directly if we are a property owner or through our rent to our landlord if we're renting. And so getting involved in those local institutions is a really good way to start. And you don't even have to run for office necessarily. Many of those local boards are now pushing out their meetings publicly by Zoom. And so you could follow along and start to understand what issues the board is talking about. You could then attend a meeting if you wanted to. And then there are always subcommittees of all of those local municipal entities. You've got your recreation commission, your beautification commission, the garden club or the historical society or the cemetery commission. There's every community is looking for people who would be willing to serve in that way. And those are really low barrier positions because they don't demand a lot of time. Chances are you're not going to get yelled at by anyone if you are on the cemetery commission, although you never know. Be careful. But they're a great way to meet people, to understand how your community is working, and for communities to share that burden of doing all of those functions across a broader swath of people. So really encourage people to look into their local boards and see if they can get involved in that way.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because when I moved to the city of Burlington a while back, the first thing I did was to go to the City of Burlington website and to look at what open positions were available in the City of Burlington.
Nice.
I ended up selecting to be on the Board of Registration of Voters, and I was at the polling stations every single election day.
Nice.
And it was an incredible opportunity to understand the process of voting in the states.
Yeah.
Or specifically in Vermont, and just how much work goes into elections by city clerks, by poll workers, by everyone, and to your point, accessibility that we have, making sure that folks who are low English proficiency have the opportunity to vote on the day that they want to vote. So I so appreciate what you and your office are doing, and that point that you made of even helping your neighbor is civic engagement. So even starting at that lower level and building up to being on a commission and then maybe running for state offices,
yes.
It's such a great opportunity. And in Vermont especially, we are so accessible.
Right.
You can walk into the state house, and to be able to engage in that way, to engage you or other elected officials in that way. So I so appreciate what you're saying. Is there anything else before we close that you would like the community, especially the community, the folks that we represent at the Vermont Professionals of Color Network, what would you like them to know?
Yeah, I think it would be so wonderful if they started at whichever of those levels they feel comfortable with and have the capacity to, within their work and family life schedule. Because I really feel like Vermont is a better place when the folks who are doing the work in those different boards and commissions and city council are reflective of the people who live in that community. When I was first elected to the House, I was an oddity because I was a 30-something-year-old mom of 3 little kids, and many of the other people were decades older than me and the other gender. I felt it immediately that, wow, there's a lot of people around here who have no idea what it's like to be in my shoes. And so I would imagine that there are a lot of professionals of color who could lend a really important perspective, even in the beautification committee, even in the local rec committee. So start wherever you feel comfortable, and please do lend your voice, because it makes our community stronger.
Thank you so much, Secretary, for speaking with me today. I'm really excited for this election season, and good luck with everything.
Thank
to
you.
you in your office.
Yeah, it's been a busy time, and we're really looking forward to it, and hope that everybody gets out there and makes their voice heard.
Yeah, we'll definitely make sure to do our part as an organization to make sure people know where to vote and when to vote. So,
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.